This is Andy Purewal for Boxing Social in association with Betfred, and I'm joined by Seniesa Estrada over Zoom. Seniesa, how are you?
Doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. I was actually in America last week, so I'm just trying to adapt back to the UK time zone. But other than that, everything is all well. Obviously, you've got some fight news. Obviously, you're going to be fighting on the March 20th card, challenging for your first world title against Anabel Ortiz. Just before we come on to that, though, Sinisa, as this is your first time with the channel, I'd like to kind of get more of a background into your route into the sport, going through your amateur pedigree and your amateur days. So just talk me through kind of your earlier days in the sport and in boxing.
Yeah, so I started boxing at the age of 8. I had over 100 amateur fights. I had about 107 wins with about 5 losses. I was two-time junior Olympic champion, USA nationals champion, and yeah, just won about every tournament, every national tournament there was as an amateur. Um, Got into boxing um, by watching it with my dad at the age of like 5, 6, 7 years old. So very first moment I saw it, I just fell in love with the sport and started when I was 8 years old.
What was your family stance on you taking up the sport?
Definitely against it. First time I asked my dad if I can box, he told me that boxing was for boys. So even though he introduced me to the sport by letting me watch it with him, he was still against me actually fighting. So it when I asked him if I can box, I said, "Dad, do girls box?" And he said, "Yeah, they do, but there's just not that many because at the time there wasn't many. There was a huge time where women's boxing was just completely dead, and that was around the time that I was coming up in the amateurs and when I first started boxing. So I wasn't familiar with seeing women's boxing on TV or seeing it anywhere. Um, but I asked him if I can box, so he took me to a local gym, and they turned me down because I was a girl. So ended up going to another gym that my dad had gone to and trained at when he was a kid, and started from there and never stopped since.
What was it like when you was trying to come through into the sport as an amateur? And you mentioned there wasn't the exposure on the women's side of boxing, and there wasn't many female boxers about when you first started. What was it like trying to enter the sport with effectively, I imagine, not enough role models, not enough people to look up to from the female side of boxing? How did you find kind of motivating yourself?
Yeah, it was really hard. Definitely had to like just motivate yourself, and like you said, there was nobody to really look up to. Like I idolized and looked up to my favorite fighters that I watched, like Roy Jones Jr., Sugar Ray Leonard, but looking up to those male fighters is not the same as having that female to look up to. So it was really difficult. It was difficult. All through the amateurs, just trying to stay active and trying to get fights. We would travel across the country just to have one fight. And my dad did whatever he needed to do in order to keep me active and to keep me fighting so that I can be the best that I could possibly be. So yeah, it was really difficult. Like I can go on for hours talking about different struggles and how hard it was coming up at that time. But now I'm just grateful that I can be that inspiration to younger girls and other women who now have females in boxing to actually look up to.
I mean, when you see the exposure on the female side of the sport now, there's pretty much a female world title fight every other week, probably as often now as what there are male world title fights. Has it surprised you just by how much of a growth there has been to the side of the sport?
Yeah, it's definitely surprised me. Like I've always known that like women's boxing will take this step and will get to where it is right now, but I just didn't know when. So but I always knew it would happen. So it just started happening within the last like what 2 years, 3 years the most. And it's really a good thing to see, and I know that it's just going to continue to get better and better and bigger for all women.
Talk to me about kind of that transition then when you've had such a decorated amateur background, moving into the pro ranks. How did you initially find it?
Yeah, I felt the move into the pros was easy for me as far as like the transition for as far as like my style and stuff because um I feel like I always had that professional style even though I was a top amateur. I always fought my way, my style. I never adjusted or fought the USA boxing way or the Olympic way. I just fought just being myself and the way I was taught since I was a kid. So I feel like the transition in that way was easy, but the transition as far as everything else that I didn't expect was so difficult as far as like staying active and getting fights and signing with the big promoter and fighting on TV. Like I had no idea how difficult all of that would be.
You're 19 and owner, Seniesa, and one thing which I've spoken to other female boxers about in the past is there's not a massive dearth of female boxers, so you could jump from say national level up to world level. There's no in between to prepare you, or there's not enough of kind of a balance because there's not as many female boxers to kind of aid you in your development. How do you feel going into this world title bout coming on March 20th? Do you feel like you have had the right preparations? Do you feel like you might have missed out on it? How do you feel about it all?
Um, I feel like this first world title fight is happening at the perfect time for me, perfect time in my career. I feel like I haven't even like hit my prime yet and that peak, and I know it's coming, and I know I've been just feeling even better and improving and feeling even stronger in my previous fights, and yeah, I feel like this is the perfect timing, and I've in women's boxing it's so different, like what you were saying right now, how you can just jump from different levels because there's not too many women. So like I've been offered to fight for title fights when I was like 4-0, 5-0, and at the time, of course, like it didn't make any sense. I was like, why would I do that? I'm not being televised. I'm not getting paid what I'm supposed to be getting paid. And a lot of it's sad because a lot of women do have these big fights and or world title fights, title fights or world title fights, and it's like they're not being paid what they deserve. The fights aren't even being seen because they're not televised. So I stood patient and I continued to wait until it was the right time to take the world title fight. And I feel like now is the perfect time. It'll be seen globally on DAZN. My pay is definitely what I deserve to be making. It's on a platform where I can represent women's boxing the best way I possibly can. So yeah, I feel like it's just perfect timing.
Talking about that, Sunisa, what's it like teaming up with Golden Boy and being on DAZN? What is that experience like?
Oh, it's great. It's amazing. Like I was saying in my previous interviews that even before I started boxing, I always knew, even as a 6-year-old, before I started boxing, I always said to myself, I'm going to sign with Golden Boy Promotions one day. Like I just knew it. And of course, with Oscar coming from the same neighborhood that I'm from, and being a huge inspiration to all Mexican Americans and everyone who's from LA, was definitely a big inspiration. So just being signed with them is just a dream come true.
Now, as we mentioned earlier, Anabel Ortiz for that WBA title on March 20th. Talk to me about the fight, Sinisa. What are you expecting?
Um, I'm definitely expecting to bring the title to the US and to bring it back to LA. I know it's going to be, Annabelle comes to fight every fight. She's a tough opponent. She's defended her title about 12, 13 times. She's held the title for a long time. So I know, she's a great champion, but I'm just so prepared mentally and physically. I feel the best I've ever felt in training camp and in sparring, and now is just, I know now is my time to have that title. And I've seen her fight where she comes forward. I've seen her fight where she tries to back up and box. So I don't know what she's going to do against me, but I'm prepared for anything that she brings. I'm preparing for her to, come forward, back up, whatever it is. I'm prepared for it.
How has this camp fared in comparison to your previous ones, knowing there's a world title on the line? Have you felt an added sense of pressure? Have you felt any nerves, or do you think any of that will come into play come fight night?
Um, yeah, I mean, I feel like, of course, there is a lot of pressure just because I'm representing women's boxing on a global platform, and everyone is going to be watching, and I feel like I have that responsibility to put on a great fight for all the people watching who maybe are doubters of women's boxing or don't like women's boxing. I want them to watch me and say, I am now a fan, or now I want to watch women's boxing because of her. So I think that's the only pressure I have, is just, making sure that I put on the best performance I can to represent all other women. And as far as the fight, I always go into every fight nervous, very nervous, but it's because I just want to make sure that I perform at my best and do what I'm supposed to do in there.
Of course, I have to ask about your last performance, winning with the quickest stoppage in female boxing history against Miranda Atkins. Just reflect on that for me, for as little of kind of an experience you can take away from it. Just reflect on the stoppage.
Yeah, I prepared a 8-week training camp for 7 seconds, but that was okay because I like I said, I don't go into a fight expecting a knockout. I go in there preparing for it to go the distance, because that's what you should do. And I I just had no idea that it would end that quickly. But yeah, I'm, even though it was only 7 seconds, I'm still glad that I was able to fight and actively stay active and prepare for that fight, because during that whole pandemic, so many people were not active and not fighting. So I'm just glad I had the opportunity to fight.
Would you have rather, going back to that fight, would you have rather had gone just a few rounds just to shake off any form of ring rust, just because of the pandemic, not being able to get out as often as what I imagine you'd have liked to, just to have gone a few rounds to shake that ring rust off? Would you have preferred that, knowing you are heading into this world title bout now?
Um, no, no, I would rather it end as quickly as possible. Like, I still went through a whole training camp and still went through so many rounds of sparring for that fight. So, it ending that quickly, still at the same time showed me that I was prepared, physically, and I was prepared as far as like the accuracy of my punches and the way everything was supposed to, the game, the way the game plan was supposed to be implemented from the start. So
Now, Seniesa, just before I let you go, I want to get your thoughts on the headline fight: Virgil Ortiz versus Maurice Hooker. Your thoughts?
um I got Virgil Ortiz. I think it's going to be a really, really exciting, really good fight. But Virgil Ortiz is definitely one of my current favorite fighters. So I have Virgil with that one for sure.
Right, Seniesa, we will leave that there now, and I appreciate your time this evening over here. I think it's what, middayish or something, or in the morning over where you are. Just before I let you go, though, for a final word to everybody who will follow you for the rest of this year and will tune in on March 20th, what would you like to say to them?
I would just like to say thank you. Thank you, everyone, for all of the support. And March 20th is going to be a great night. So don't miss it.
Seniesa, it's a pleasure to speak to you for the first time. I'm sure it will not be the last. Thank you for your time this evening, and thank you for speaking to Boxing Social.
Thank you so much. Bye.